Well, this is just delightful. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg sat for a hearing and was grilled by Republicans, but did such a fantastic job of pushing back against them, schooling them, some might say, and dismantling some of these talking points. Of course, him being the Transportation Secretary means a lot of their questions have to do with electric vehicles and criticizing the Biden administration and his department's attempts to push us forward on that front. But watching him engage with these Republicans is always a delight. This comes from a hearing that I think we looked at a clip from previously. Then I realized there was so much from this that we didn't cover that we have to, that's even better. So again, as I've gone over now with a lot of these Pete Buttigieg related moments, aside from just him being rhetorically talented, one of the key takeaways I want all of you to have is seemingly the critiques, the attacks from these Republicans against the policy of Democrats and the Biden administration and some bipartisan Republicans here and there when it comes to furthering our investments in the green energy future. The very criticisms they use to try to invalidate those attempts are actually bolstering the necessity for those strides. I'll explain more what I mean after playing this.
Secretary Buttigieg, you have recently, just earlier today, you've answered a lot of questions related to the slow implementation of the EV charging stations, and one of the conversations that you had, I thought was concerning, and I want to kind of touch upon it, was the statement that this push towards electric vehicles, even though there's a cost of slave labor, and that we're seeing, and it's not just cobalt. We've got lithium and other items that are being supplied by 90% of it is coming from China. So we're empowering someone who's an aggressor to the United States, and yet you're saying that it's fine so long as we're saving lives in America.
That's not an accurate characterization of what I've said. We wish you would have supported us in moving more of this onshore so it'd be produced in America, but the legislation did pass. And to take graphite alone, we're going to be able to supply, we estimate, 47% of it domestically. Nobody believes in allowing any product that doesn't meet labor standards to be imported to the United States. And if you'd like to work with us on making sure any of the 159 items of concern to include cobalt can be better enforced, we'd welcome that.
Your view that it saves lives.
We believe that preventing harmful pollution, well, we don't believe, it is a fact that preventing harmful pollution in the U.S. will save lives.
Have you done any calculations, given the current rate of fires that occur, and these fires, as reports indicate, take hundreds of thousands of liters of water to extinguish when an electric vehicle catches fire? Do you have any?
And we'll watch a little bit more of this back and forth in just a second here and then get on to another Republican, and that's Eric Burlison right now challenging Pete Buttigieg. And again, I'm not trying to portray the concerns being expressed by people as we attempt to make this transition and do so in a way that is the best for people. That it's irrational to have these concerns or point to data points that seem to indicate we're not making the strides as fast as we'd like to, or these investments aren't being as effective as we'd want them to be. Have those concerns, power grid capacity, here talking about the labor practices that go into the supply chains that we then get many of these components for things like electric vehicles. But see, one of the big efforts in these pieces of legislation headed up by Democrats in Congress, again, sometimes getting some support like the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Chips and Science Act, from some Republicans, then being signed into law by Biden, and many of these things implemented by Pete Buttigieg's department. One of the efforts is not just manufacturing electric vehicles in the United States, which that's one of the goals, so that the industries can thrive here, so that companies can benefit here, jobs can be created here, but also to move the supply chain to derive from the United States, many of these components that then go into the manufacturing. Here's CNBC reporting on just that. The new U.S. plan to rival China and end cornering of market in rare earth metals. The United States has made previous attempts to re-emerge as a dominant player, and the re-emerge term is key because we have, in times gone by, been more dominant in this space, in a rare earth supply chain that is responsible for some of the most important materials involved in electric vehicle production, battery making, renewable energy systems, and technology manufacturing. Under the Biden administration, the effort is receiving renewed focus, with massive investments planned in climate change technology and a hard line being taken on geopolitical rivalries and the national security threat posed by China. And it goes on to talk about China is dominating this space right now. But as a part of these trillions of dollars of investments made by Biden and Democrats, you have an effort to move the supply chains here, to do some of the mining and then the processing of these different minerals in the United States. That then goes into hopefully companies manufacturing the cars in the United States, and you have much less of a liability with a rival, with sometimes a competitor economically, having such control over this important industry. So yes, there are concerns. We always, seems weird that they have very limited concern about the labor practices and the ethical or unethical nature or the horrific things that are done in that space. But we should be concerned across the board with that and making sure we're not importing supplies, components of different things or products that have an unethical supply chain, bad labor practices. But that is only an argument for further making these sorts of strides. To have cheaper energy for consumers, that's better for the planet, that saves lives because we're not putting horrible pollutants into people's bodies, and allows for more ethical supply chains. That's what we're pushing towards. If you appreciate the work that we do to put together the show every day, a way you can show that and help us continue to grow is by clicking the subscribe button. It's easy, it's free, but it makes all the difference. Back to the video.
Any research that indicates how many people might die from some of these fires?
I haven't seen a projection of that. I'm sure you're aware that flammable liquids are also a safety concern, and either way, we work to make sure that they are handled in a safe fashion.
We're not seeing the reports of vehicles, like an epidemic of regular gasoline vehicles catching fire.
You're not?
Across the United States.
You've never heard of gasoline fires in vehicles?
150,000 liters of water to put out.
Are you familiar with what happened to the I-95 bridge? Let me assure you that the use of flammable liquids to propel hundreds of millions of vehicles includes hazards. Let me also make you aware that the American Chemical Society estimates that 9,700 Americans a year die from the pollution associated with passenger vehicle use in this country.
Let me ask this question.
Just a brutal fact. And to back it up by zooming out a little bit, you have the World Health Organization estimating that 3.2 million deaths per year are attributed to household air pollution. These pollutants lead to strokes and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, lung cancer, etc. Millions of people are dying because of the pollution. And yes, that's something we should care about. Is that really something I have to say? And the fact that very real concerns are being exploited, or I should say, real challenges in the transition to renewable energy options, while those are being exploited to distract from what could be a very unifying, patriotic mission to dominate this space, dominate the transition, and thus benefit from it greatly as the most powerful country on the planet. Here's a little bit more. This is now with, let's see here, John Duarte, also upset with Pete Buttigieg.
Our government today are slavery free.
Here's what I can tell you. 80% less cobalt is going into today's EV batteries. Most of the cobalt that is used comes as a byproduct from nickel and copper mining, and major battery makers
So you don't
in the
want to
U.S.
discuss
such. Could
slavery.
you please let me finish?
No, you're not finishing. I asked you about slavery. You're telling me about constituents and other components. Just answer the question I actually asked, which is, do you believe the electric vehicles being produced and subsidized by American taxpayers today are slavery-free, fair trade vehicles?
I should certainly hope that they are, and if there's any specific evidence of any violation of any provision to prevent forced and child labor of any product, any of the 159 products listed,
Will you speak to our
we
friends
will
from
work on
Congo
that.
out
Now, what
here?
I would also,
Will you
look,
speak to our friends
we
in
can do one
Congo
of,
out here in the atrium
I'm
today
just
on your way out?
astonished that people
Will
who have
you get a
shown
hold-
zero interest
Will
in
you-
confronting
will
forced
you-
or child labor on any of the other 158 products listed are suddenly terribly concerned about it on this one
We are
product, which we can
subsidizing
actually
this with
do
American
without
taxpayers.
that much
This isn't
cobalt.
just about unfair
Yeah, so the point that Pete Buttigieg is trying to make, he's making it well, but being talked over there by Duarte, is that it's just true that it's hypocritical what we're seeing. Not even hypocritical, just sort of proof of a little dishonesty that many of these Republicans are being very selective in what they choose to focus on. Even just with cobalt, they're not interested in the other 100+ products that are being imported, but just as it pertains to electric vehicles. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't care just because they might be sort of inconsistent. We should still care across the board with making sure the labor practices that are going into the things that we're using, the products that we're using, are ethical and people are not being harmed. Right now, there's just a gargantuous problem with that across the world. We are so often promoting with our consumer habits those very horrific practices. And so that's something that we need to be working to minimize. Some of the actions, as I previously referenced, these very investments they're critical of, are in furtherance of the right thing on that. And also, I do feel like it's these same Republicans who are sort of always weary of regulations, who maybe wouldn't be super on board with the types of regulatory steps I'd be willing to take, I want to take, to prevent unethical labor practices, or at least us promoting that, funding that through our consumer habits as a country. But that would take the very regulations that often Republicans are super pumped about rolling back. Let me know what you thought of that in the comments. If you want to get the extra episode of the show daily, you can do so by clicking the join button below.